I set my coffee cup down on the kitchen table and watched my son walk through my living room like he was already measuring the walls for someone else's furniture. Diane had been gone for 18 days. 18 days since I held her hand in that hospital room in Halifax and watched the woman I'd loved for 34 years take her last breath. 18 days since I'd stood in the rain at Fairview Cemetery while the minister said words I couldn't quite hear over the sound of my own heartbeat. And here was my son Derek, standing in the middle of the home we'd built together, talking to his wife Sandra about the property value in this neighborhood and what the market looks like right now in Dartmouth. He hadn't even taken his coat off. "The Hendersons down the street listed at 6 to 10, Sandra said, scrolling through something on her phone. She didn't look up when she said it. She hadn't looked at me since she walked through the door. "Dad," Derek said, turning to me like he just remembered I was in the room. "We need to sit down and talk about some practical things." I picked my coffee back up. "All right," I said. That was the first meeting. There would be 3 more before I finally understood what my wife had already known long before she got sick. Diane and I had met in the summer of 1989 at a folk festival in Wolfville. She was there with girlfriends. I was there with my cousin. She was wearing a yellow sundress and laughing at something her friend said, and I walked directly into a tent pole because I couldn't look away from her. She thought that was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. We talked for 6 hours straight that night, and I drove 3 hours back to Dartmouth the next morning knowing I was going to marry her someday. We did marry. 2 years later, in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Wolfville, with her father grumbling good-naturedly about the cost of the tent rental, and her mother crying through the entire service. We were not rich people. I worked for a marine engineering firm. Diane taught elementary school for 22 years, then moved into curriculum development for the school board. We were careful with money. We saved. We paid off the house in Dartmouth after 26 years, which felt like winning the Stanley Cup. We took one big trip every other year, Newfoundland, then Prince Edward Island, then out west to see the Rockies, then Scotland to trace Diane's family roots. We didn't drive new cars. We cooked most of our meals at home. We were happy. Derek was born in 1993. He was a good kid, mostly. Energetic, curious, a little impatient. He played hockey through high school, went to Dalhousie for business, got a decent job in financial services in Halifax. He met Sandra at a work function 8 years ago. She was organized, efficient, and had strong opinions about how other people should live their lives. I tried hard to like her. I tried for 8 years. They had 2 daughters, 7 and 9 now, and I loved those girls genuinely and completely. That part was never complicated. What became complicated gradually, so gradually I didn't notice it happening, was the way Derek started talking to me differently once they bought their own house in Bedford. It was subtle at first. Little comments about how big our place was for 2 people. Suggestions that we might want to think about the future. Questions about whether I had a financial advisor, whether my will was up to date, whether Diane and I had talked to anyone about our retirement plan. Diane noticed it before I did. "He's doing inventory," she said to me one evening, maybe 3 years ago. We were sitting on the back porch after Derek and Sandra had left from a Sunday dinner. She said it quietly, without much emotion, just as a fact. "He's just being practical," I said. She looked at me with that particular expression she had, patient, a little sad, completely certain. "He's doing inventory, Harold. He wants to know what there is, and when he gets it. That's not the same as caring about us." I didn't want to believe that then. I believed it completely now. The second family meeting happened 4 days after the first. This time Derek came alone, which somehow felt more serious. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with a notepad, an actual paper notepad and a pen, and he started talking about next steps. The house needed work, he said. The roof was aging. The furnace had been serviced recently but wouldn't last forever. The neighborhood was good, but the market was moving, and waiting too long could mean leaving money on the table. There was a new seniors development in Sackville. He'd looked into it. 1-bedroom units starting at $280. Very clean, very accessible, close to amenities. You'd have cash in your pocket and no maintenance headaches, he said. He said it like he was doing me a favor. "I'm 63 years old," I said. "Dad, these places aren't just for elderly people. It's about lifestyle. I mow my own lawn. I fix my own evastrafts. I shoveled this driveway for the last 29 winters. Sandra and I just think—" "I'm going to stop you there," I said. "Sandra and I. That's interesting. I wasn't aware Sandra had a role in deciding what I do with my home. Derek set his pen down. We're just trying to help. I know you think you are, I said. And I left it there. But it didn't stop. That was the thing I hadn't anticipated, how persistent it would become, how quickly the concern would drop away and leave only the urgency underneath. 2 weeks after that conversation, I came home from a walk to find Sandra's car in my driveway. I hadn't known she was coming. I let myself in through the side door and found her in the den, opening drawers. I stood in the doorway for a moment. "What are you doing?" I asked. She spun around. To her credit, she looked genuinely startled. "Harold, I didn't hear you come in. Derek asked me to pick up some documents." "What documents?" He thought there might be some insurance paperwork. "Sandra," I said, "you're in my home, going through my things, without asking me." She closed the drawer. "I should have called first. You're right. I'm sorry." She left quickly. I stood in the den for a long time after her car pulled out, looking at the drawer she'd been searching. I didn't know what she'd been looking for specifically. I had a feeling it didn't matter. The act itself was what mattered. The act itself told me everything. That evening I called my daughter-in-law's bluff and checked all 3 drawers in that desk. Nothing was missing. But something felt broken anyway, some assumption I'd been carrying about the basic decency of the people closest to me. I sat in my armchair, in the quiet house that still faintly smelled like Diane's hand cream, and I felt something settle into place inside me. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more useful than anger. I started thinking clearly. Here is something I hadn't told Derek, or Sandra, or anyone in the family, except my nephew Owen. 3 months before Diane was diagnosed, she had come to me one Sunday morning with a folder. She put it on the kitchen table and sat down across from me and said, "I need you to look at this with me." Inside the folder was information about a piece of property in Prince Edward Island. It was 11 acres in a rural area, outside Montague, in Kings County, the quieter eastern end of the island, away from the tourist crowds near Charlottetown. There was a house on it, a modest one. Red brick, built in the 1940s, renovated twice. A barn that had been converted into a workshop. A small creek running along the back edge of the property. Diane's great-aunt had owned it and had left it to Diane when she passed in 2019, through a will that had been quietly and carefully handled by a solicitor in Montague. I had known about the aunt. I had not known about the property. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. Diane looked at the folder. "I wasn't sure what to do with it. I thought about selling it, but then I went and saw it." She paused, and I thought, maybe someday we'll need somewhere to go. I asked her what she meant by that. She just looked at me. That same expression, patient, a little sad, completely certain. She transferred the property jointly into both our names 18 months before she passed. We visited it once together, last spring, before she got too sick to travel comfortably. We walked the 11 acres slowly. We sat by the creek. She held my hand and didn't say much. I didn't understand then that she was saying goodbye to it, and hello for me. When she died, the property passed to me directly, as the surviving joint owner, outside of the estate entirely. Derek didn't know it existed, neither did Sandra. I want to be honest about this. I wasn't strategic by nature. I didn't sit down and plan some elaborate scheme. What I did was simpler and more practical than that. I decided, somewhere in those long, quiet evenings, after Diane died, that I owed no one an accounting of what she had chosen to give me. It was hers to give. It was mine to keep or share or speak about as I saw fit. That was it. That was the whole thing. The 3rd meeting happened on a Thursday evening. Derek brought Sandra this time, and they had printed documents, actual printed documents, about the Sackville development. Floor plans, pricing tiers, a brochure with photographs of smiling seniors doing aqua fitness. Sandra slid the brochure across the table to me like she was making an offer on a deal. "We've done a lot of research," she said. "I can see that. The unit we think would suit you is on the 2nd floor. It's 940 square feet. It has a small balcony." "Sandra," I said, "how old do you think I am?" She blinked. "What?" "I'm 63. I played hockey until I was 51. I walked the Cape Breton Highlands Trail 2 summers ago. I do not require a 2nd-floor unit with a small balcony." Derek leaned forward. "Dad, it's not about needing it. It's about being practical before." "Before what?" He stopped. "Finish the sentence," I said. "Before what, Derek?" He rubbed the back of his neck. before things get harder to manage. Things are not hard to manage. I managed them fine. I managed them when your mother was sick. I managed the mortgage, the house, the appointments, the medications, everything, for 3 years while holding down my job, and I did not ask you for help managing a single bit of it. Did I? He didn't answer. I'm asking you a real question. Did I? No, he said quietly. No. So understand that when I say I'm fine, I'm telling you something accurate about my situation, not something I've told myself because I can't face reality. I'm telling you I'm fine because I am fine, and this house is not for sale, and this conversation is over. Sandra opened her mouth. This conversation, I said again, is over. They left. I washed the 2 mugs I'd set out. I hadn't offered them anything, hadn't even put the kettle on, which was, if I'm honest, the most Canadian way I knew to express that they were not particularly welcome, and I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard in the February dark. I thought about the property in Montague. I thought about the creek. I called Owen the next morning. Owen was my sister Margaret's son, 41 years old, a carpenter who lived in Antigonish with his wife Teresa and their teenage son. He was the kind of person who showed up. When Diane was sick, Owen drove down from Antigonish 6 times without being asked, just to help. He fixed the back fence. He replaced the hot water heater. He sat with Diane for 3 hours one afternoon while I went for a drive because I needed 20 minutes to be somewhere I couldn't hold everything together, and he never mentioned it afterward. I told Owen about Montague. There was a long pause on the phone. So Aunt Diane set this up, he said. She did. Another pause. She always was about 6 steps ahead of everyone. She was. I said. I asked Owen if he and Teresa would want to come with me to see the property in the spring, before I made any decisions. He said yes, before I finished the sentence. In March, I listed the Dartmouth house with a realtor I'd used once before, a straightforward woman named Bev, who didn't oversell things. We agreed on a price. We accepted an offer inside of 3 weeks, a young couple from Ontario, who were relocating for work, thrilled to be getting into the Halifax market. The closing was set for the end of May. I did not tell Derek. I know how that sounds. I want to explain it properly. I wasn't hiding it out of spite. I was protecting a decision that was mine to make, from interference I had already seen coming. Derek and Sandra had shown me what they would do with information. They would make it into a negotiation, a pressure campaign, a series of printed brochures slid across my kitchen table. I didn't need that. I needed to move in peace. The week before closing, I drove up to Montague alone. I spent 3 days at the property, staying in the house, learning the rooms and the sounds they made at night. I walked the 11 acres twice a day. I fixed a broken step on the back porch. I sat by the creek each evening until it got too cold. It rained on the 2nd day. I sat inside by the window with a cup of tea and watched the rain come down on the field, and I talked to Diane out loud. I'm not embarrassed about that. I told her I understood now. I told her thank you. Owen and Teresa came up on the weekend, before I took possession in Dartmouth. Owen walked the property slowly, the way a carpenter does, looking at things carefully. He got up on the barn roof and walked around up there for 15 minutes. He came down and said, "Bones are solid. Roof's got maybe 3 more years. I can help you with that." He said it the way he said everything, simply, without drama, like it was already decided. I gave Teresa a key to the house. She cried a little. I pretended not to notice because I knew she'd prefer that. It was the end of May when Derek found out. Not from me, from someone at the registry office. Apparently, some administrative process that flagged the sale. He called me on a Friday evening, and I could hear in his voice that he was working hard to stay controlled. "You sold the house," he said. I did, without telling me. It was my house, Derek. "Dad." His voice tightened. "Where are you living? What did you do with the money?" "I'm living somewhere I'm very happy. The money is being handled responsibly." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm giving." There was a silence. "Then, Sandra and I need to know you're okay. We need to know what's going on." "I'm okay. I'm better than I've been in a long time. That's all you need to know right now." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I come and see you?" I had thought about this. I'd thought about it on long walks along the creek, in the evenings on the back porch, during the slow mornings, when the island fog sat low over the field. I thought about the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder during long drives. I thought about the man who'd brought a notepad to a meeting with his grieving father. I thought about how those two people were the same person and what that meant about forgiveness and what it meant about trust. You can come in the fall, I said, on your own, not with Sandra. And you come to visit your father, not to evaluate anything. He said he understood. I'm not sure he did, entirely. But he came in October, and he sat in the kitchen of the house in Montague, and he drank my coffee, and he was quieter than I'd seen him in years. We walked the property together. He looked at the creek for a long time without saying anything. Mom would have loved this, he finally said. She did love it, I said. She picked it. He looked at me. Something moved across his face that I couldn't quite name, not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that understood there was a reckoning somewhere in the distance that we hadn't had yet. We didn't have it that day. Maybe we will someday. I'm not in a hurry. There is a woman named Patrice who farms the 10 acres directly north of my property. She grows garlic and heritage tomatoes and sells at the Montague Farmers Market. She is 67, widowed 6 years ago, and she has no patience for nonsense of any kind. She came over 3 days after I moved in, knocked on the door, handed me a jar of pickled garlic, and said, "You'll want to know, the road floods at the south end every spring. Welcome." Then she left. That was the beginning of what has become the most uncomplicated friendship I have had in my adult life. We have coffee on her porch on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She doesn't ask me personal questions, and I don't ask her personal questions, and we talk about weather and farming and occasionally politics, and sometimes about the people we've lost and what that weight feels like over time. She laughs at unexpected things. Diane would have liked her immediately. I still talk to Diane sometimes, out by the creek, mostly, or in the early morning when the light comes in across the field a certain way. I tell her about Patrice. I tell her about the barn roof, which Owen came and reshingled in August, and about the heritage apple tree at the north edge of the property that turned out to have been there for over 80 years. I told her about Derek's visit in October. I told her I was finally sleeping through the night. Diane's great-aunt, the woman who first owned this land, had a saying that Diane mentioned to me once years ago, and that I've thought about many times since. She said, "The best gift you can give someone is a soft place to land when the world turns hard." That is what Diane did for me. Not the property itself. The property is just land and a house and a leaky barn roof. What she gave me was a way out of a situation she could see coming before I could see it myself. She loved me specifically enough to plan for my particular kind of vulnerability. I have thought a great deal, in my quieter evenings on the island, about what the difference is between a family that looks after each other and a family that looks after what they expect to receive. They can look identical from the outside for a long time. The difference only becomes visible under pressure when someone is grieving, when someone is vulnerable, when the normal social contracts that hold behavior in check are loosened by circumstance. Derek and Sandra showed me the difference in those 3 meetings and in a drawer that should not have been opened. I don't say this with bitterness. I want to be clear about that. Bitterness would require me to spend energy I no longer have on grievances that are, in the end, ordinary human failings. People convince themselves that wanting something is the same as deserving it. People confuse proximity with entitlement. People are frightened by their own aging parents because aging is a reminder of things we'd rather not think about, and sometimes that fear comes out sideways, as control, as urgency, as a printed brochure with photographs of smiling seniors doing aqua fitness. I understand all of that. I do not excuse it, but I understand it. What I would want to say to anyone in the early, raw weeks after losing a partner, when the people around you start making plans, is this: your life is not an estate to be managed. Your grief is not an administrative problem. Your home is yours until you choose otherwise. Any decision that must be made urgently, that cannot wait for you to be ready, that requires your signature before you've had time to think clearly, that is not someone helping you. That is someone helping themselves. Take your time. Make no decisions under pressure, and if someone is doing inventory, you are allowed to notice. I am 63 years old. I live 11 acres in PEI with a barn that needed a new roof and an apple tree that's been here 80 years longer than I have. I have coffee with my neighbor Patrice on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. My nephew Owen is coming at Christmas with his wife and their son, and they're staying for a week, and I've already ordered a proper ham from the butcher in Montague because Diane always said a good Christmas required a proper ham. I have my mornings and my evenings and my creek and my quiet. I talk to my wife out loud sometimes, and I don't apologize for it. I am not in a seniors unit in Sackville, and I am, against most reasonable expectations for a man who buried his partner in February, genuinely at peace.